past few months have not been easy, but I'm reminded of the strength and resilience our community possesses and has shown throughout our history in the United States and this past year. I'm incredibly grateful for our supporters and everyone standing with us to fight against AAPI hate. With your help, AALEAD supported youth by providing mental health training, workshops focusing on bystander intervention and self-defense, processing spaces for our youth, and regular wellness checks. We are continuing to provide resources for COVID-related issues and encouraging our community to get vaccinated.
Hello, and thank you for joining us today for the Stigma Won't Stop Us panel on Asian American Pacific Islander youth mental health and wellness. We'll be joined by 3 experts today who will be discussing issues of mental health, bullying, harassment, and youth wellness. I'm very excited for the conversation today and hope that you learn something and take away new resources that you can apply for the wellness of your community. Hello, everybody. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us. This is the AALEAD panel on mental health for AAPI youth. We are joined here today by experts who are invested in mental wellness of our young people, and I'm so excited for the conversation we're going to have today. Just to share a little bit about the purpose of today's panel, we're going to talk about issues that are not new, but things that in the past year and a half have become top of mind for us here at AALEAD and for experts in the field. We're going to be discussing issues of mental health, bullying, and harassment, and the impacts that they have on Asian American and Pacific Islander, or AAPI youth. It's important to note that even though these aren't new, the impacts of COVID have really laid bare these issues to a heightened degree. I'm going to briefly introduce our panelists and give them a chance to introduce themselves a little bit more. So first, we have joining us today, Jamie Locke with Act to Change. Jamie serves on the board of directors of Act to Change, which is a national organization dedicated to end bullying among Asian American and Pacific Islander youth. Act to Change envisions a world where all youth feel safe and proud of who they are. We're also joined by Eric Lee, a third-year clinical psychology PhD candidate at the George Washington University. Eric's research focuses on the influence of parent-child relationships on child development, with an additional focus on examining cultural influences on parent-child relationships. And our third panelist is V.T. She is an AALEAD Maryland youth leader who goes to school in and resides in Montgomery County, Maryland. V serves as a leader in our AALEAD programs in Maryland as a representative on the Maryland Youth Council, where she was involved last year in making a pamphlet regarding youth mental health in the areas of school, the impacts of the pandemic, and Asian American hate. I'm really excited for all of us to get to have this conversation today. So first, I just want to say welcome to all of our panelists. And I know that a short introduction cannot do justice to all of the reasons and passions that you all are here today. So I wanted to pause quickly and give everyone a short chance to introduce themselves in order, going with Jamie, Eric, and then V.
Hi, thanks so much, Ari, for having me here. Hi, everyone, again. I'm Jamie Locke. I use pronouns she, her. And through Act to Change, I am able to sort of channel my passion for working to end bullying among AAPI youth. My day job, I also work in public health for the federal government, specifically in maternal and child health. I myself was born and raised in Montgomery County. I went to Montgomery County Public Schools. I'm a second-generation Cambodian American. And so now I'm learning to navigate the system myself as a parent, like many of you. I have 3 little kids, and 2 of whom are in the CPS system.
Thank you so much for being here today, Jamie.
Hi, everybody. My name is Sungmi, but I go by Eric. And I'm really excited to be a part of this panel. I was first introduced to AALEAD through a community project that I had while attending, as I was attending George Washington University. And just being connected with AALEAD and being able to be present for these AAPI youth is kind of something I strive for in the future as well. Just going into my career, I am a 1.5 generation Asian American from Korea, South Korea. And so I just want to touch upon my personal experiences as well as research and expertise out there and kind of combine those two to share some information and resources to you today.
Thank you, Eric. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, I'm V. Well, like I already said, I am a high schooler in MCPS. So I'm a student and I'm kind of in the middle of all these youth mental health issues. I'm also the daughter of 2 Vietnamese American immigrants. So there's that.
Thank you for sharing, V, and I'm really grateful that you're here with us today too. So before we jump into it, I think it's important to say that when people hear the words mental health or bullying or harassment, there's a lot of different assumptions. And I think before we really get into talking about what we think are the most important priorities for us to work on around Asian American Pacific Islander mental health, that we start off by defining some of these terms. So I was hoping that we could hear from all of our panelists to talk a little bit about what does it mean when we use these terms, and then from your perspective, how does that specifically apply to AAPI communities? I wanted to start, Eric, with you first. As a mental health professional, can you talk to us about what you mean when you talk about mental health generally, and then specifically, how does that connect to your interest in AAPI community members?
Yes, of course. I think when we talk about mental health, mental health is such an umbrella term, and we emphasize different things within it. But in essence, I just want to say that mental health is how we feel and act and think. So it really influences every aspect of our life, how we view life, how we approach our daily situations, life satisfaction, really, and kind of the fulfillment that we feel in life. And I really want to emphasize when we talk about negative mental health, we aren't equating that to any kind of disorders. When we think about disorders and illnesses, we see that mental health has reached a point where it significantly negatively impacts our life, where, we might not be able to do some of the daily activities that we are able to do, that we are supposed to do. However, in a lot of situations, in a lot of cases, mental health and negative mental health, it really impacts us sometimes in very subtle ways, where we might be able to function normally or function in the way that we are able to accomplish our daily activities. But the way that we do it or the process that we get there may be a little different than how we usually take, or it might be a little bit more difficult, or it might be challenging to get there. So when we talk about mental health, it's not just, disorders, or it's not just, oh, you aren't really functioning properly. But to society, we could be. But internally, there could be a lot of stresses and a lot of difficulties that we take. And that could also be considered negative mental health in this situation. And I think for AAPI communities specifically, we really focus a lot on the results sometimes. Like I said, as long as we're able to function and do our daily activities, then everything is okay. But really emphasizing the internal part, the emphasizing how we're thinking, how we're feeling, and how we're behaving in these daily situations, I think is something that I want to emphasize through this panel. And hopefully, as we kind of further discuss it, we're able to provide more concrete examples and more resources that we can lean upon, especially as we discuss it with the panelists here today.
Thanks for sharing, Eric. And I think it's really important to lift up the piece that you're saying where there's an overlap, but it's not the same thing to talk about mental health and some sort of disorder, right? And that every person has mental health or wellness of some sort. So if we're not tending to that, there's still something there happening worthwhile exploring. And Jamie, I was hoping that you could share a little bit, sort of connecting to Eric's point around mental health, your work in bullying and harassment. So how would you define bullying and harassment? And then for you, what is the thread connecting this to the topic of mental health?
Thanks, Ari. And so bullying is really anything that someone keeps doing to you to make you feel bad about yourself, right? And so bullying can take place anywhere. We often hear it referred to as an event or something happening in school. It can happen outside of school. It can happen through social media, anything on the internet. It could be verbal. It could be physical. And cyberbullying, as I mentioned, is I think increasing, especially as we entered COVID-19, and much of our interactions with our peers and others kind of moved online. So that can be, again, social media, texting, gaming. There's probably so many other platforms that I'm not aware of that young people are. And just linking to what Eric really talked through, what severe impact that can really have on a young person's life if they are being made fun of, if they are being called names, if they are being harassed. The variety of different behavioral mental health conditions, from just fear, anxiety, depression, to self-harm. And unfortunately, the statistic that suicide is a leading cause of death among many AAPI young adults in kind of that teenage and young adult age range, which makes it a really high priority for organizations like mine and the work that we're all doing.
Thank you for sharing, Jamie. And something that we've noticed being virtual at AALEAD for the past almost 2 years now is the amount of disconnection from supportive adults and supportive peers, I think, can really amplify the impact of any of those negative actions that you're talking about, right? So it feels like it's been time to have this conversation on the mental wellness of AAPI youth and the ways that COVID has allowed some of these things that can be harmful to really exacerbate those challenges that our youth are experiencing. I wanted to throw it to V and just ask, from your perspective, how do you define mental health? And then how does this compare with the definitions that you've heard or observed from peers or adults in your school? Because as you said earlier, you're sort of in the mix of all of these things taking place in real time. So I would love to hear a little bit from you.
Mental health just has no set boundaries, so it's so hard to define. But to me, I guess it's about your feelings and your emotions and your thoughts and how healthy they are or less so. So it has no physical evidence sometimes. And this is a bit different than what I've heard from in school. Honestly, students, they don't really want to talk about it much. And teachers, when they teach it to you in class or talk about it too, they always want to define the term first and then have you do assignments on it or whatever. So it's a bit in between defining and not defining, which contributes to the stigma since not everyone really knows what it's about.
Thank you for sharing, V. Yeah, and I think it's kind of funny that I wanted to start out with the definitions, but I think what you're reminding us of is that before defining things and creating boxes, what is really important is allowing folks a safe space to be able to share what their experiences are and what their feelings are. Because we can define all we want, but if we're not making those connections, then we're not going to be able to create those supports that we need. So I really appreciate Eric, Jamie, and V, you all sort of drawing the picture for us of what you see as the foundations of the definitions of mental health, bullying, and harassment. And I hope that for our audience, that helps set a foundation for them about what we mean when we talk about these things. And hopefully they can already draw some lines about how these pieces are all connected. But I wanted to just sort of jump into it now from your standpoint about the priority issues around mental health, including maybe bullying and harassment, but also including other topics that we might not have mentioned yet. So I'm curious for each of you, from your perspective, in the past year and a half, right, after COVID hit, moving into virtual work, virtual schooling, increased isolation, and then the increase in anti-AAPI rhetoric and hate, what has surfaced in your work as the most pressing issue surrounding mental health for AAPI youth at this time?
Yeah, I think one of the major things that you touched upon already is kind of that isolation piece. COVID has really exacerbated the isolation, and not just in the physical sense, but also in the emotional, and really just feeling isolated from society itself, especially with the AAPI community. With the stigma or the discrimination that's faced because of COVID, we already kind of felt a barrier between us, and other society. And so already there's kind of that isolation piece in society itself. And really, because of the online system and virtual system, there was a physical isolation. But even when we go back to school, even when we're trying to think about it, like V kind of mentioned, people aren't really thinking about mental health and really aren't talking. So when we don't talk about it, then everything becomes internal and everything kind of feels like, okay, it's my problem and it's my issue. So might as well just keep it internal and not really make it look bad for the group or make myself look. I think that's really been something that's been really big in COVID. Everyone's mental health has been suffering and everyone's daily activities has been suffering, but I feel like we don't want to admit it and we just kind of keep on isolating ourselves even more. And it's just not us, but society as well. So it's been really difficult during COVID, especially. And I think it's just kind of getting worse as we kind of continue to avoid this topic of what mental health is.
Yeah, just building on what Eric said, I think as parents, a lot of the conversation has been about the focus on learning loss or the academic achievement that our children are trying to make up for because of the quote unquote lost year, rather than the focus on the social emotional health that our kids lost that year of that interaction and building relationships and working through dilemmas and conflict with peers in the classroom. And so I think that really, really heightened a lot of, mental health challenges that a student may have been already experiencing from the last year. Something you mentioned, Eric, also made me think of it's not just our students who are also experiencing, a lot of the isolation, the parents themselves too. And so sort of the modeling, right? If you're seeing mom, dad, or a caregiver not being able to, cope as well, I can imagine the youth in that household or around those important adults also see that kind of modeling behavior and themselves may have a hard time being able to cope or ask for help. If that's not the norm, quote unquote norm, is to ask for help when you're not feeling like yourself.
So I guess sometimes, a lot of times, people don't ask for help. So I'm gonna bring this back to this pamphlet the Maryland High School Youth Council did last school year. We surveyed a bunch of students from middle school and high school, and we got a bunch of data. And one of the interesting points was that most of the people felt pressure from themselves instead of some outside influence. And I guess that ties back to what Eric said earlier about how this lack of communication about mental health causes you to internalize stuff. So eventually, it'll just seem like you're making yourself do this, you're pushing yourself to do other things, and it just all builds up. And also, 2/3 of the participants felt like their mental health declined during the pandemic. So definitely last year did not help. Yeah.
That study, and I think we saw something similar in an Act to Change survey that we released May of this year, where 80% of respondents, Asian American respondents, said that they experienced bullying, and how that really highlighted that it became normalized. Like you were saying, V, we just don't talk about it because it's not maybe something that we were brought up, that it was okay to talk about. Perhaps bullying amongst Asian American students is not something that educators think is an issue, that is an issue for other kids and not Asian Americans. And so it really highlighted that for us, and to think about, well, what are some of those underlying issues that we can be better about spreading awareness and education for both parents and caregivers, but also our teachers and school staff.
Yeah, and I also want to mention, in mental health professionals, minorities are already less likely to seek help than the majority, but it's also the fact that Asian Americans are the least likely to seek help with mental health issues. And I think, there's some of it is the mental health field itself. There's not that many resources, especially for Asian Americans. But also, I think, like V was mentioning, children and youth, they don't really know how to. And like Jamie was mentioning, some of that's through modeling. Their parents also don't really know how to seek help. And I think just emphasizing that help-seeking behavior and helping normalize that situation is going to be essential, especially as we kind of continue to move towards what we call normal, as we continue to get a little bit more past COVID and try to enter this normal situation where everyone's supposed to be normal. But like everyone was mentioning, mental health isn't something that has increased in the situation, but decreased. So emphasizing that help-seeking behavior, I think, is going to essential, especially as we continue to move on in this year and next year as well.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. And I'm hearing so many nuggets from Jamie, V, and Eric about things that I want to pick at and have folks highlight. I think the question that I want to follow up with each of you is, what are the opportunities that you're seeing right now to allow folks to seek that help, get that access to support, whether it's around mental wellness resources or bullying and harassment? What are the things that we're hoping we can really encourage folks to do to connect them to those resources? So maybe Eric, since you were just talking about it, you can speak a little bit to that, and then we can roll it back.
Yeah, I think one of the major things, especially that occurred during COVID, was a lot more people in society recognized the importance of mental health. I think that was something that was really incredible coming out of COVID. And a lot of resources with like online therapy or just recognizing that mental health is important to the workplace as well as society and social life, I think has been something that's continuously increased. It's unfortunate that in the Asian American community, that emphasis might have not been as clear, especially because of stigma or some of that shame surrounding mental health and a lack of understanding of what mental health is. I think we're still a little bit lacking in behind in the definitions or the understanding of mental health is, but really just emphasizing, I think society is, especially in America, has been recognizing that mental health is important. And although, specific resources for Asian Americans might not be as prevalent, it's still something that we're working towards and continuously building. And so I think it's going to be hopeful for a better future as long as we're able to understand that mental health is an essential part of our daily life.
So that, we're seeing the statistic actually from that same survey that compared with non-Asian Americans, Asian Americans only 38%, compared with 60%, told an adult that they had been bullied, and thus perhaps missing that opportunity for referral or recommendation to get support services. So one thing that I know I would be an advocate for is just like in the school system to have more training and awareness for educators of how to support their Asian American kids. And in general, for all young people to have a trusted adult in that school system and at home, parents and caregivers to talk to about anything. And you don't have to call it mental health, because I think even that word, oftentimes we know that translation into our parents' language may not be accurate, etc. And we know that many of these resources may not be available in other languages. As well. So whether it's, a texting therapy app or another type of support may not be as readily available. So really advocating that they be made available in multiple languages.
Yes, regarding school route and all the resources we've been given by teachers and administrators, there have been some phone numbers and links to various organizations and counselors thrown around. But to be completely honest, I don't think anyone is very encouraged to use those resources. first of all, because like this one person in our survey said they felt the need to repress their emotions to live up to this image of them, like not having any problems at all. And second, it's because like there isn't a wide variety of resources. There's like only one kind. And I suppose this lack of options makes it feel like you don't have any choice in how you want to help yourself and get better. So I guess having a wider variety of resources would probably be helpful.
Yeah, thanks for adding that, V. I think it's really important for all of us to hear that there are resources being provided, and those resources don't feel particularly useful, or maybe aren't followed up with because it doesn't feel like they are of the right variety or enough choice. And a thread that I'm hearing through the things that all three of you are saying, and I think we've sort of mentioned it or sort of alluded to it, is the idea of a stigma around mental health and wellness within AAPI communities, whether that's with youth or parents. And I think also just this topic of cultural relevance, right? So I'm curious if, and I know, Eric, you are interested in working specifically with Asian American Pacific Islander youth and parents. Jamie, you're working on bullying within AAPI communities, and V, you're really looking at what is the mental wellness of our AAPI peers. I'm wondering if each of you can speak to the importance of this conversation within the AAPI space, and the things that you think we need to remember, even among ourselves, right? When we're saying, well, we gave this resource, what are the things that we need to remember to make things not just accessible, but relevant?
Yeah, thank you for opening up the conversation with that, especially because, you know, with the research, it's like I mentioned, you know, AAPI community is the least likely to seek mental health professionals. And that is because the first thing that they usually go to is community. I think in a cultural sense, we are really, I guess, learned to keep it within the family or keep it within the community to ensure that our image or our group image remains consistent to the outsiders. So rather than looking at professionals, we really emphasize the community. And I think that's going to be the most important thing, how to make the community a safe space for AAPI youth, and how to support parents in the way that we are able to communicate and able to have this safe space. And I think it's just encouraging ourselves to talk about it and open up these conversations, even though they might be difficult, even though they might be uncomfortable. It's not something that we ever talk about because of some of that stigma and some of the shame. And especially during COVID, there's a lot of pressure on the Asian Americans and API youth community to maybe even suppress their identity because you don't want to be clashing with the rest of society or face that discrimination straight face on. But, you know, providing that safe space, at least within the community itself, within your direct, parent, teacher, and child relationships in schools, just creating a safe space where we're able to talk about mental health and not through definitions or not what is good or bad, but just our personal experiences. Like, what are we going through? And what is everyone else going through? Making sure that we are not feeling isolated, but understanding that as a greater whole, as a greater society, we might be going through the same things. And that's not something to be looked down upon. We might be stressed. That's not something to be looked down upon. But really opening it up so to understand that everyone is kind of going through things that I might be going through. And that would really decrease that sense of isolation and loneliness that really comes with a lot of these mental health issues.
And I would build on that as you talked about how we, V, I think you kind of alluded to something that made me think the model minority myth, where, this is, mental health things that doesn't affect the API community, right? We're all healthy and wealthy, resilient, have no issues, and that's very not true. We're not just told to keep our heads down and keep going. We really need to take care of ourselves, both physically and mentally. And I think a lot of that has to do with what, Eric, you were just saying, of like, there's not one size fits all approach, right? It may be tapping into those community centers or the faith-based centers, right? We know that tapping into some of those trusted leaders, maybe it's bringing in an imam or another faith leader to spread that message that yes, it's okay to feel this way and to seek help and to report an incident of bullying, for example, and this is how to do it, to deliver those resources and messages that you said you're getting. If anything, maybe you're bombarded with. You have the numbers. It's a matter of, well, what does this mean to me? Is this a safe number to call? Is this a safe person to talk to? So it's really going through those community channels, Eric, as you mentioned, I think are really important. And I think even like looking big picture is, youth of color have been othered, right? Because we are constantly, and I was a youth one time many years ago, right? We may not be considered American enough. And that's because we are not seeing ourselves in, the curriculum that we're taught or, textbooks in school. And so I think that's another place for the broader systems and school districts in our area to really look at, ethnic studies and how, all children, all people see themselves reflected in the textbooks and the history and the current events that they're learning about.
Yeah, like community and communication is definitely key because you'll always feel alone unless you actually give yourself the chance to talk to other people about it. Like, how are you supposed to know this person is also going through what you're going through if you don't talk to them? Yeah, and I know a lot of people, they feel like they have no margin for error and that they can't possibly fail. But just because they feel that way doesn't mean it is completely true. Like, they can try their best, but if their best isn't like the best of everyone, then it's still their best. You don't have to live up to other people's standards. And I guess people have to slow down a lot and just talk and talk, which is probably going to be awkward at first. But communication and like feeling free to do anything is probably going to be better in the long term.
Yeah, and I kind of want to emphasize that point of communication, and really, the earlier the better. Honestly, there's a lot of studies out there that says, half of mental illness or half of mental disorders begin at the age of 15. That's right where the youth are, and that's right where high school is, and that's kind of like lifetime prevalence. So starts at 15 and kind of goes to the lifetime. So really emphasizing that communication and openness to these kind of conversations, the earlier the better, because I think a lot of people think that mental health and mental health disorders start a lot later, like as adults, but that's really not true. The youth are probably the most susceptible to these pressures and to these challenges in life.
Thanks for adding that, Eric. And I just hear each of you speaking so much about, right, what are the particular contexts that the communities we work with experiencing, and how do we make sure that these resources reach people and are actually useful? And some of the themes I'm hearing are, I think it starts with relationships. It starts with trust, being able to bring the things that are useful into the community spaces into, the hands of people who are already trusted, right? And for all of us to continue to build and develop that trust within the folks we work with. And then really understanding the context and the specific needs, right? Maybe it is that somebody needs to talk about how they're feeling in this moment, or that somebody needs to have that extra support to report bullying or harassment, right? And to hear it's not your fault that this is happening, and I'm here to help you, and you deserve to feel safe, right? So just trying to understand what our individual roles are and how we can help others to really seek that help and get connected to those things. And something that I want to lift up that Eric, you just said is, earlier communication and connection to resources. So I'm sort of hearing this urgency and repetition around wherever we need to put it, whoever we need to get these resources to and this information to spread it far and wide. I repeat myself all the time because I know that things don't stick the first time, right? And so I have to tell people 5 times before they really take me up on my offer to check in and just see how they're doing. So kind of going off of that piece, I'm curious if there's any specific resources that any of you all would like to share. We can go ahead and add those links onto the page for people who might be interested in just looking into a few of the things that you've all referenced.
Change has a number of resources on our website, again, activechange.org. One, I mentioned the 2021 bullying report that we put together that has some really astonishing statistics, but also a call for action about many of the things we're talking about today. And another just really quick resource that might be really helpful is what we called an anti-bullying fridge page, where you could print it out and actually put on your fridge for both parents and youth to look at, to really understand what is bullying, what you can do if you experience bullying, but also if you witness bullying. And also, again, a mini call to action there.
And I know Ari and V can probably talk much more about this, but I think community resources like AALEAD, where we're able to have a lot of communities that have similar experiences to one another, Asian American, Pacific Islander communities coming together to actually share our resources and share our information with one another, I think is pretty much essential in this situation. Not feeling like you have to change yourself to fit some sort of criteria or feel more American enough or anything like that. Just to have those safe spaces is going to be something that we should be utilizing, especially if mental health professionals or some of those resources may be a little bit more daunting. Then we should be reaching out to those communities that are similar to us.
A community is definitely more informal than other resources, which is why people probably move towards it more. And also why it works is because there's a lot of people with more empathy instead of sympathy. Like, you can't just feel sorry for a person. It probably won't make that person feel better. But if you have similar situations, if you relate to one another, then you have this shared sense of unity, and maybe you'll be able to help each other up along the way.
Yeah, and I think it's so important to have those resources where we can reference something and say, is this a problem? Is this not? If it is, where do I go? And then to have those people who we can go to. There's a lot of research that having one trusted adult in a young person's life can have positive impacts long term. And so, something that at AALEAD we're doing in our mentoring program is pairing a trusted adult with a young person who may want an additional person who can just give them guidance, whether it's talking through college applications, the stress of college applications, or just trying to figure out, what they're good at and what they care about. So if people are interested in, taking on that role within AALEAD as a mentor, that is something that you can definitely check out on our volunteer page. And we're also open to folks who want to come and share their knowledge and expertise, not only with staff, but with youth. We've been lucky enough to have Eric and Jamie in some of our staff spaces to share a little bit more about their expertise and impart those resources with our staff, because as we talked about, those relationships of trust rest with our direct program staff. So as much as they're able to pass those things on, just benefits our youth in the community even more. And I also want to lift up that each of you has shared so much today, and I just really appreciate all of the information you shared, but more so the heart that you come to this work with. As we talk about community and relationships, my work wouldn't be possible without the important work that you're doing to make sure that each of those niches and needs in our community is filled. V, I really appreciate you lifting up the youth voice of the things around mental health and COVID in school that are really driving this conversation. So I'm just adding that. We're going to probably add that pamphlet and information onto our resource page as well, so that folks can really see the things that you learned from that project. Our time has really flown today. We started off by talking a little bit about framing up what we meant by mental health, bullying, and harassment, and thinking about what are our priorities in our own work, what do we see in the AAPI community, and what are some resources or important action items that we would like to put forward today. If, we only could leave our audience with one thing each, I'm hoping everyone can share what's the one thing that you're hoping people leave this panel with today, knowing or feeling inspired to do. And then I will say thank you.
Sure, happy to start. For me, it would be to make sure you're able to open up those lines of communication with the youth in your life, to share, to listen without judgment. It sounds harder than it is, but if you haven't, to really please do so. And something I heard that was interesting is that mental health is really learning how to rest. And so, V, as I listened to you about the homework and all the other pressures that you're dealing with, I'm sure extracurriculars is also just learning how to rest, both as a parent and caregiver and modeling that for your child.
And I want to second that. Let's just talk to one another. Let's just talk to each other. Whether it's with a mental professional, where it's like a third-party source that you want to talk to without judgment, or talk to your parents, talk to your children, talk to your friends and peers. Just understand that we aren't in this alone, and it's worse to just keep everything inside. And just so feel free to talk. If there's someone who's willing to listen, grab onto them and talk with them, because I'm sure that they will be talking back. And I think that's something we might be scared of, but it should be something that we really want to strive for.
I am also going to emphasize the talking. Like especially these days, people are just texting or like writing emails. No one gets around to talk. Texting and like occasional conversations isn't gonna fix anything. It's just gonna continue festering. So yeah, sit down and talk. I guess you're allowed to be heard. Just make clear what issues or what things you want the other people to know. And I guess specifically to parents, you could make sure your child knows that you're always there for them, and make sure they're not like a disappointment or anything. Make sure they know their best is enough. Make sure everyone knows they're enough. So yeah.
I almost feel like there's nothing I need to say to follow up to those things, because yeah, that's also powerful. I think one of the pieces that sticks out to me is, even if you think somebody knows, it can be worth it to say it out loud. Even if you think somebody knows that you care about them, it probably can make a difference to let them know. Even if you've told them, I'm here for you to talk to, a reminder never hurts. And then I would say, you don't have to do it alone. Whether you're a youth worker, a parent, a student, a professional in the mental wellness field, just knowing what resources there are to help you, and that you can connect people to resources if you feel like it's out of your bandwidth. But just being there and being available to be that first step of support, and knowing that it takes a village and that more people are there to support you in that process. Yeah, I encourage folks to keep that in mind. I want to say thank you again to our panelists, Jamie, Eric, and V. This conversation has filled me with hope, really. I mean, hearing you all close out and really uplift the connection and the care that you want everyone to come away with. I think if we continue to slow down and make space for these conversations with the people we care about, that we will continue to see growth and benefits in our community. I really thank each of you for your time today, and look forward to being able to share these resources with our community to continue to make them stronger. Thank you so much.